Hello everyone, my name is Mark Edward Blanton with The Real South Africa.
And I am Dr. Latasha Blanton, also with The Real South Africa.
We have an amazing group trip that you will be interested in. It's with the African Diaspora News Channel, a great YouTube channel, gives you great information about what's going on in Africa. But we have a group trip featuring Phil Scott, the host.
And the trip is going to take place on March 16th through the 25th. It's going to go to Johannesburg and Cape Town, and It's in 2022. If you're interested in traveling, please send an email to info@therealsouthafrica.com.
And we'll see you here in sunny South Africa.
Abdurrahman Ibrahim Ibn Sori was West African royalty before he was enslaved on a Mississippi plantation. After a shackled journey across the Atlantic, Abdurrahman Ibn Sori was desperate to make the man about to purchase him, Thomas Foster, understand his terrible mistake. He wasn't supposed to be enslaved. The 26-year-old was the heir to one of Africa's most influential kingdoms. Instead of freedom, his protestations earned him the derisive nickname Prince, which he would carry for his next 40 years of enslavement. Sori had arrived in Natchez, Mississippi after being kidnapped by enemy troops in 1788 in his native Fort Joran in what is now Guinea. The powerful royal was sold to slave traders for a few muskets and rum at the height of the global slave trade, when an estimated 80,000 Africans were being captured, chained, and shipped across the Atlantic Ocean every year. Despite the scale of the slave trade, Sori was one of the 12.5 million Africans forced from their homes and sold to the New World between 1525 and 1866. Detailed narratives of individuals forced into bondage are limited, particularly of Muslim slaves like Sori. He is an exception, a highly educated aristocrat. His dramatic quest for freedom would eventually catapult him to national celebrity, which means his remarkable life is more documented than most. Sori's story is an insight not only into the brutalities of slavery, which undergirded the global economy for generations, but on the way some enslaved people managed to manipulate and dire circumstances. In his decade-long battle for liberty, Sori would weave a web of duplicity so dramatic that it would ensnare not just American President Jim Quincy Adams, but also the Sultan of Morocco. Ignoring Sori's protestations, Foster marched him to his frontier homestead in Natchez, Mississippi, which was still Spanish territory at the time. It was a far cry from Timbo, the traditional hub where Sori's father had confiscated power in Fort Joran. Sori had been educated in Islamic and politics in a neighboring Timbuktu, and by the time he was captured, he spoke at least 5 languages and was the head of a 2,000-person army. Sori was horrified by how primitive and underdeveloped Natchez was. The kingdom of Fort Joran was a very sophisticated society. This was a period of real intellectual expansion. They had a constitution and they had laws. Foster made haste with sharing Sori's long hair, a sign of nobility in Fort Joran, and forcing him into vicious maneuver. Refusing to stomach the humiliation, Sori ran. For weeks, he survived in dense, unfamiliar terrain. Wanted posters sprang up and slave hunters pursued him to no avail. But eventually, he realized there was no escape. During the isolation of being alone in the wilderness, it dawned on him that he is no longer a prince. He is no longer a warrior. From that point onwards, his dignity was based on his ability to master the circumstances that he was in. It was also when he realized the return to Fort Joran would not be possible, perhaps ever. Faced with no good options, Sori returned to Foster and set about making himself indispensable. An uneducated man who grew tobacco and herded cattle, Foster knew little about cotton, a crop of growing consequences in North America. Sori did though, as cotton was grown in Fort Joran. With Sori's help, Foster became one of the region's leading cotton producers as his plantation swelled. So too did Sori's influence. He became a foreman and met 25-year-old Isabella, a midwife also enslaved by Foster, that Sori would go on to marry. The two had 5 sons and 4 daughters, and Sori's relative freedom meant he would grow vegetables and sell them at the local market. One market day in 1807, a chance encounter would once again radically alter his life. Decades earlier, a shipwreck had left a British surgeon named John Cox marooned on the West African shore. He only survived because he was rescued by a group of Fulanis who brought him to Timbo. There, he met Sori and his royal family, who offered him medical care and friendship for over 6 months of his stay. In a remarkable twist of kismet, Sori ran into Cox at the market where he was hawking vegetables. Cox saw an opportunity not only to right a grave injustice, but to repay his debt to Sori's family. He set about trying to buy his freedom. Foster refused at any cost. Sori had been with him for nearly 2 decades at that point, and his knowledge was too valuable for Foster to lose. Cox would spend the rest of his life trying to purchase his one-time hospitality, while his efforts were ultimately fruitless. Word of the fantastical story of chance meeting one either side of Atlantic spread quickly around town, and when Andrew Marshall, a local newspaper, heard about it, his interest was liquid. After Marshall found out Sori spoke Arabic, he leapt to the conclusion that Sori was Moroccan. Not wanting to slow his enthusiasm, and probably also understanding the American racial hierarchy that placed Moors well above West Africans, Sori chose not to correct him. It would be his first time of many strategies invasion Sori would make in the years to come. Sori asked Marshall to help him get a letter to Africa, and Marshall agreed. Sori took several years, but eventually produced what was likely copied Quran verses. Marshall used them to authenticate Sori's Moorish origin and attached his own letter expressing Sori's desire to join his relatives in Morocco, which he sent to the United States Consul in Tangier, Morocco. Word of Sori's predicament eventually got to the Sultan of Morocco, and from there, the news of a captive royal would its way to the United States government. Worried about diplomatic relations, Secretary of State Henry Curry arranged for Sori's release on the February 22nd, 1828. Foster agreed to Sori's release with compensation under one condition, that he be transported directly back to Africa without ever enjoying the privileges of a free man within the United States of America. Sori's freedom was imminent, but Isabella's and his children were not. His determination to return to Fort Joran was matched by his refusal not to do so without his family. As he prepared to travel to Washington, D.C., from which he would set sail to Africa, words of his epic grew. Newspapers covered his odyssey, and events along his route were planned in his honor. Everywhere he went, words of an enslaved man who could not only read and write, but was a skilled orator and claimed to be Muslim prince, drew crowds of shocked and gawking outlookers. Before he left Natchez, Marshall gifted him a traditional Moorish costume for the trip, upping the absurdity of his deception. Sori was a showman and planned to use the trip as an opportunity to fundraise for his children's freedom. A costume could only help. He was quickly able to buy Isabella's freedom, but he had to continue soliciting donations for his children, asking even President John Quincy Adams for fundraising, which Adams refused. History once again caught the attention of an influential figure, this time Thomas H. Gladett, one of the founders of the American School for the Deaf. He was part of the American Colonization Society who saw Sori an opportunity to spread Christianity across Africa. Sori also saw an opportunity, the chance to rub shoulders with men with deep pockets. To prove his commitment to Christianity, Gladett asked him to write the Lord's Prayer in Arabic for use in missionary work. Sori complied. By the late 1820s, the abolitionist movement was picking up steam, and Sori, whose tale was a powerful indictment of slavery, was beginning to stoke resentment among Southerners fighting to retain their practice. At the time, Andrew Jackson was preparing for a presidential bid against Adam and used the Sori as a campaign tool. Ridiculing Adam for his support, Foster caught wind of Sori's effort to free his enslaved children and threatened to revoke Sori's freedom. Marshall, not wanting to come down on the wrong side of power, turned his back on Sori. Sori's tale of Moroccan descent unveiled when he explained to Adam that it wasn't exactly where he wanted to return. Public support began to dry up after almost a year. Sori had only half the funds needed to free his children. Once again, Sori set sail across the Atlantic, this time joined by his wife and with the US government footing the bill, desperate hoping their children would be able to follow them. When he arrived in Monrovia, Liberia in March 1829, the first thing he did was unroll his prayer mat and bow down to the earth. Sick and weakened by the journey, Sori would contract a fever just 4 months later and die at the age of 67. He would never return to Fort Joran or see his children again. Years later, Gladett would find out that Sori had not in fact written the Lord's Prayer when proving his commitment to Christianity. He had instead copied the first chapter of the Quran. Sometimes history isn't written by the victors. And that is the story of an African prince who was sold to slavery. My name is Osie The Born Child. I'm getting a little bit emotional with this story. Please come down in the comment section and let me know what you think. Until next time, I love you all, brothers and sisters. But until then, please take care. And don't forget to subscribe.
Colonization never ended in the white supremacist system. And as we see today, the colonization is in the mind. Now, those who have been enslaved and those who have been colonized, we're still dealing with the remnants of that through the colonization of the mind. Pick up my book, 7 Steps to Decolonize the Mind, and we will help deprogram you from the colonization that was put upon you by generations and generations of white supremacy. You can pick it up today on Amazon.com.